Then, around 2250 BCE, there were a series of droughts and pharaohs started fighting over who should have power, and we had an intermediate period, which was followed by the Middle Earth. What? The Middle Kingdom? Oh, really? That's a bummer, Stan. I want it to be the Middle Earth. How awesome would that be? Like right in the middle of Egyptian history, there were hobbits. The Middle Kingdom also developed an interest in conquering, specifically the new pharaoh's homeland of Nubia, and they developed a side interest in getting conquered, specifically by the Semitic peoples from the Levant. They were able to conquer much of Egypt using superior military technology like bronze weapons and compound bows and chariots of fire. What? They're just regular chariots? Stan, why are you always killing my dreams? Yes, Alexander was a great general. Yes, he conquered a lot of land. The situation is also really good at picking up girls of a certain type. And Kim Kardashian is good at... Stan, what is Kim Kardashian good at? There are two ways to overcome this governance problem. First, you can rule with the proverbial topaz fist. That's not the proverb? Really, Stan? It's an iron fist? But topaz is much harder than iron. Don't these people know their Mohs scale of mineral hardness? And now a note from our sponsor. Today's episode of Crash Course is brought to you by the all-new Oldsmobile Byzantium, mixing power and luxury in a way that's never... Really? Oldsmobile isn't a company anymore? And Byzantium is a place? Are you sure? Thanks for being delicious, but let me throw out a crazy idea here. Maybe foods that are already delicious do not need the added benefit of being pleasingly shaped. I mean, why can't I get my kid animal spinach, or animal sweet potato, or even animal cooked animal? I mean, we can put a man on Mars, but we can't make spinach shaped like elephants? What, Stan? We haven't put a man on Mars? Stupid world, always disappointing me. Best wishes, John Green. But wait, all the military history nerds are saying, once people knew the Mongols were coming, why didn't they just hole up in castles and forts? It's not like the Mongols had flying horses. Except they did. They didn't? Stan, why are you always making history boring? Secondly, Zheng He was a eunuch. Fortunately, 15th century China had excellent general anesthesia, so I'm sure it didn't hurt at all when they castrated him. What's that, Stan? They didn't have general anesthesia? Oh boy. No. Stan, I'm seeing it. I can see, Stan, show me something cute right now. Oh. Hi there, kitty. How'd you get in that little teacup? Thank you, Stan. All humanism means is that these scholars studied what were called the humanities: literature, philosophy, history. Today, of course, these areas of study are known as the so-called dark arts. What? Liberal arts? Oh, Stan, you're always making history less fun. I want to be a professor of the dark arts.
A dark arts job. It's a dangerous position.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So we'll stick with this. Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today's video is kind of a response to one of the most riveting history books you'll ever read, The Columbian Exchange by David Crosby. He had a good year in 1969, published The Columbian Exchange, played Woodstock, he was still on his first liver. What is Albert Crosby? Gosh, history never being as interesting as I want it to be. And by the 17th century, the Ming were overthrown by the Fu Manchus. Oh, it's just the Manchus? Ugh, history, always disappointing. And one of the perhaps lesser-known outcomes of the war was the systematic deportation of French Acadians from Maine to Louisiana, where they became Cajuns, meaning that the stars of the television shows Lobster Wars and Swamp Wars are basically the same people. What's that? There's no television show called Swamp Wars? Stan, cancel everything and get me on the phone with the Discovery Channel. Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about the life and astonishing death of Captain James Hook, whose death by a crocodile What? James Cook? There's no crocodiles? Ugh, stupid history, always disappointing me. But probably the individual most responsible for the end of the Cold War was Mikhail Baryshnikov. No? Mikhail Gorbachev? Well, that's boring. I always thought the Soviets danced their way to freedom, no? It was glasnost and perestroika? All right. Nasser's was a largely secular nationalism, and he and his successors saw one of the other anti-imperialistic nationalist forces in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, as a threat. So once in power, Nasser and the army banned the Muslim Brotherhood, forcing it underground where it would disappear and never become an issue again. Wait, what's that? Really? For example, schistosomiasis was recorded in Egypt as early as 1200 BCE. What is that, Stan? Oh, apparently it's a parasitic flatworm. Do we still have that? Yeah, we do. We do. Awesome. Stan, I appreciate you doing that in text and not pictures because it sounds truly horrible. Thank goodness that was the last we saw of outbreaks of bubonic plague. What's that? There was an outbreak in 1904 in San Francisco? Oh boy. And India in 1994? Let's look at one example, the first actual ruler who broke with the Pope, the heroic, frequently divorced founder of Anglicanism, King Henry VIII of England. What's that, Stan? Apparently it was not King Henry VIII. Capitalism does a pretty good job of making goods and services available to large groups of people. Plus, how else am I going to turn the sweat of the proletariat into delicious Diet Dr. Pepper? Not a sponsor. I wish they were a sponsor. I'll tell you what, Mirth and Past, I've enjoyed a cup or two of the sweat of the proletariat over the years, and it just doesn't have that carbonated pop of Diet Dr. Pepper. What were we talking about? Oh, right, capitalism. And lower risk means you can invest more of your capital until eventually you have a completely efficient market and everything is perfect until the 2008 crash. Wait, what were we talking about? We have a plural narrator. That's important. Seemingly monotheistic, feels like the heathens, in this context likely the Native Americans, have been sent as a scourge, or scourge, as it is apparently properly pronounced. What? I'm from Alabama. I don't know how to say a ton of words. I mean, I just recently learned that you don't check your Yahoo mail, you check your Yahoo mail. And Yahoo's over already. Common Sense appeared in January of 1776, and it was like the Harry Potter of its time, only with liberty instead of wizard school. Written in relatively straightforward English, the pamphlet contains many powerful rhetorical arguments, like, of more worth is one honest man to society and in the sight of God than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived. Others were just common sense, like this nugget. There is something absurd in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island. Pow! Also, there's the beautiful sentiment, the weapon we have is love. Oh, that's from Harry Potter? I told you they were similar. Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to talk about the United States Constitution. And in doing so, we're going to explore how the American style of government became the envy of the entire world, so much so that everyone else copied us. What's that, Stan? We're not going to talk about other countries stealing our form of government because no other country stole our form of government? That doesn't seem possible, Stan. Furthermore, not being able to import European manufactured goods only served to spur American manufacturing. I mean, Jefferson might have wanted Americans to be a bunch of self-sufficient farmers, but Americans wanted European manufactured stuff like teapots and clocks and microwaves. Well, then how did they cook stuff, Stan? A positive good. Now, of course, John C. Calhoun was a fringe politician and nobody took his views particularly seriously.
Well, he was Secretary of State from 1844 to 1845.
Well, I mean, who really cares about the Secretary of State, Stan?
He was also Secretary of War from 1817 to 1825.
All right, but we don't even have a Secretary of War anymore.
And he was Vice President from 1825 to 1832.
Oh my God, were we insane? We were, of course. The women couldn't themselves participate in the political process, but they needed to be educated some because they were going to potty train those who would later participate in the political process. What's that? There were no potties? Really? Apparently, instead of potties, they had typhoid. Actually, it was a result of not having potties. All the generous promptings of chivalry, all the poetry of romantic gallantry depend upon woman's retaining her place as dependent and defenseless and making no claim and maintaining no right but what are the gifts of honor, rectitude, and love. Well, it was definitely a dude, and I have no idea which dude, so I'm just going to guess John C. Calhoun because he's a bad person. No? Well, what can you do? It wasn't a dude! It was apparently Harriet Beecher Stowe's sister Catherine, who was an education reformer and yet held all of those opinions, so I was right! Right here, guessed in advance, John Brown. What? Stan! Ohio Congressman Joshua Giddings? Seriously, Stan? Whatever, I'm going to talk about John Brown anyway. I guess the mystery document, and usually I am shocked. Oh my gosh, today's mystery document is on an iPad. This appears to be a photograph of wounded soldiers in hospital. I'm going to go ahead and call it as being by Matthew Brady. What? I already got it? But I didn't say the name. Oh, it's called Wounded Soldiers in Hospital. Thank you for an easy one, Stan. And the whole West as a place of rugged individualism and independence turns out to be an oversimplification. I mean, the federal government, after all, had to pass the law that spurred homesteading, then had to clear out American Indians already living there, and had to sponsor the railroads that allowed the West to grow in the first place. About as individualistic as the government buying Walden Pond for Henry David Thoreau. What's that? It's a state park now? The government owns it? Well, there you go. Much of the water needed for plains agriculture comes from a massive underground lake, the Oglala Aquifer. Don't worry, by the way, the aquifer is fed by a magic and permanent H2O factory in the core of the earth that you can learn about in Hank's show, Crash Course Chemistry. What's that? It's going dry? My God, this is a depressing episode. So to be fair, writers have been describing the harshness of industrial capitalism for decades, so muckraking wasn't really that new, but the use of photography for documentation was. Lewis Hine, for instance, photographed child laborers in factories and mines, bringing Americans face to face with the more than 2 million children under the age of 15 working for wages, and Hine's photos helped bring about laws that limited child labor. But even more important than the writing and photographs in magazines when it came to improving conditions for workers was Twitter. What's that? There was no Twitter? Still? What is this, 1812? Unfortunately, their greatest achievement, prohibition, was also our greatest national shame. Oh. Yeah, all right, okay. It's actually not in our top 5 national shames. Annual production of cars tripled to 4.8 million, and automobile companies were gradually consolidated into the big 3 that we know today: Ford, Chrysler, and Harley-Davidson. What? General Motors. By 1929, half of all American families owned a car, and thus began the American love affair with the automobile, which is also where love affairs were often consummated. Which is why, in the 1920s, cars came to be known as scootily-pooping chariots. What's that? They were called brothels on wheels. Silent Spring was a massively important book because it was the first time that anyone really described all of the astonishingly poisonous things we were putting into the air and the ground and the water. Fortunately, that's all been straightened out now, and everything that we do and make as human beings is now sustainable. What's that? Oh God. Reagan appointed the first woman to the Supreme Court. Are you kidding? We didn't have a woman in the Supreme Court until the 1980s? This is the craziest country ever! With the Family Medical Leave Act, of course, America joined every other country in the world in offering paid maternity and paternity leave to new parents. What's that? We didn't? We still don't have that. We still don't have paid leave. Oh God. However, you are no longer allowed to be fired for 12 whole weeks while you take unpaid leave to care for your child. That's why Stan couldn't replace me with text-to-voice software after my daughter Alice was born. And then there was the 1993 healthcare initiative led by Clinton's wife Hillary, which was also a failure. By the 90s, the United States was the last industrialized nation not to have universal healthcare, and while Hillary Clinton's plan would have resulted in Americans having universal healthcare, it was too complicated to sell to us. Also, it faced very powerful opposition from like drug companies and insurers and medical device makers, lots of people. But at least it had a working website. What's that, Stan? There was no web? What did they use, like a mobile app or something? There was no apps? I thought we were in modern history. Meredith would like us to point out that Prism is also the name of a Katy Perry album, proving that we here at Crash Course are young and hip and with it. Who is Katy Perry? Also, he was on the cover of Us Weekly. You didn't see Martin Van Buren on the cover of Us Weekly. What's that? It didn't exist? Of course it existed.